guys, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Whew, we are coming up so fast on Christmas, I cannot believe it. By the time this video posts, we'll probably only be a few days away. But I wanted to share a Christmas morning tradition with our family, and I wanted to share it with you in case it might be a yummy recipe you might want to try out with your family this year or next year or just any time of the year because it's that good. So when I was growing up, one of the things that was always on our breakfast table on Christmas Day was a Sara Lee butter streusel coffee cake. I don't know if there are any other Sara Lee fans out there, but if you do love that coffee cake as much as we did, you know that a couple years ago they discontinued that product, and it was such a bummer for our family because that butter streusel coffee cake was just Christmas morning for us. So we went a year without it, and on year two, I was said, no more. I'm gonna learn how to make it. And I found a recipe, and yes, it's not like don't bite into it and think immediately this tastes exactly like Sara Lee, because they use a fake imitation butter, and we're gonna be using real butter, so that butter streusel flavor isn't quite as strong and salty as Sara Lee's version is, but this coffee cake has all of the Sara Lee butter streusel coffee cakeness going on about it. It smells like it, it tastes very, very similar, and it's actually really easy to make. So we're going to bake that together, and this recipe makes two little coffee cakes, and I will put them in the freezer and we'll bake them on Christmas morning. But since we're making this video, I don't want to give you this recipe and then not show you the finished result. So we are going to actually go ahead and bake it together so that you can see the finished result at the end of this video. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op, and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk. And so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us. Okay, before we get started, I just want to give credit where credit is due. So this Copycat coffee cake recipe comes from a blog called That Skinny Chick Can Bake. She has delicious recipes on that. It's a cute name for a blog. Okay, so let's get started. First, we're going to make our dough for the cake. So we need 3/4 cup of milk, and it needs to be at room temperature. So I went ahead and set this out a little over an hour ago so it can be coming up to room temperature. And you do want to do it in this order because we want those liquid ingredients to be on the bottom. Okay, next we need 6 tablespoons of cream cheese, again at room temperature. So I've had this sitting out for a little while. It could probably be a little warmer than what it is right now, but I need to get going on this, so we're just going to go with it. Okay, next we need 6 tablespoons of butter, also at room temperature. I actually forgot to set the butter out early, so what I did was I went ahead and melted it, and then I put it in the freezer just for a little, not the freezer, excuse me, the refrigerator, just to let it solidify for a little bit. So it's basically the same as softened butter. So we need 6 tablespoons of that butter at room temperature. Okay, next we need a 1/4 cup of sugar, and I need to get my 1/4 cup. There it is. Okay. A 1/4 cup of sugar. After that, we need 1 egg. This is our duck eggs, and we decided to save our duck eggs strictly for baking. They kind of didn't taste lovely for like fresh scrambled eggs. They're fantastic for baking goods. Next, we need 1 package of instant yeast. We don't purchase the packages of instant yeast because we buy them in bulk. So if you have just loose yeast, the equivalent for 1 package of yeast is 2 1/4 teaspoons. So we're going to add 2 and 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast. Next, we need 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to go ahead and use my Redmond's real salt for this because my Celtic salt isn't fine ground, and I want fine ground to be able to mix into this dough really well. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of salt. And then it's time to add our flour, and we need 3 cups of flour. Now, just like with many baked goods, or at least bready type baked goods, we can add more flour if we need to. If the dough appears really, really sticky, we're going to start adding a little bit more as we start seeing it looking too sticky. But sometimes I don't even need extra flour. So we're just going to start with 3 cups of flour, and then we'll talk about if we need more based on the appearance of the dough in just a second. Okay, at this point we're ready to mix. And we're going to mix it together, and then we're going to knead it. So let me mix it together, and then we'll talk about the kneading process. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to get some of that chunk of cream cheese that wasn't quite at room temperature enough. I'm going to go ahead and kind of mix that in manually and see if we can't get it nice and incorporated. I'm just kind of trying to cut that cream cheese into the dough since it wasn't quite softened enough. But if you let your cream cheese come to room temperature, you won't have this issue. Okay, so now we're going to knead it, and there's not a particular amount of time that you need to knead it, but the dough needs to be nice and smooth, and that's the texture that we're going for. Right now you can see it looks really shaggy. It looks just really piecey, shaggy. We want it to be nice and smooth. So I'm going to set this, let's say I'm going to set a timer for, let's do 4 minutes, and then we'll see the texture, and we'll talk about how to know whether or not you need to add more flour. Okay, so I'm going to set this to knead, and then knead it for 4 minutes. Just kidding, I forgot. I need to switch to my dough hook. So I have kneaded this recipe by hand several times because I just got a dough hook this year. So you can absolutely knead this by hand if you don't have a dough hook for your stand mixer. But I got a dough hook this year, and I'm just going to save myself and my muscles and go ahead and let the dough hook do the work for me. Okay, so now we're going to knead it for 4 minutes. Okay, it's been about 4 minutes. So let's test the dough and see how it's looking. It is looking nice and soft, but it's also looking very sticky. So I just washed my hands. I'm going to use some clean hands. I'm just going to pinch. Oh yeah. This is very, very sticky dough. It shouldn't be sticking to my fingers that badly, and it shouldn't be sticking to the sides of the bowl that badly either. So what I'm going to do is just start adding a 1/4 cup of flour at a time and wait until we get that smooth, not super, super sticky texture. So let me clean off my fingers real quick. Okay, so I have my 1/4 cup measuring cup here, and I'm just going to add in 1/4 cup. And I'm going to knead it for 2 to 3 more minutes, and we'll see how it looks then. Okay, let's try again. I can see that it's sticking to the sides a little bit, but not quite as much. I've got clean fingers, so I'm going to pitch it a little bit. Okay, so it's not sticking as bad, but it is still pretty sticky. So we're going to add a 1/4 cup more flour, and this is going to be the last 1/4 cup of flour that I'm going to add, because you don't want to add more than 1/2 cup of flour extra to this. So I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of flour, and then I'm going to knead it for 5 minutes at least and get it as soft as possible before we move on to the next step. Be back in 5 minutes. Okay, so we added 1/2 cup of extra flour, and we're not going to go any more than that. The dough is looking a good bit softer. It's still a little bit sticky, but that's okay. We don't want to add any more than what we've already added. At least I can detach it from my finger, from each finger, by rubbing it. Whereas before I couldn't do that. So we're going to call this good. Let's get it off the hook, and then we're going to let it rise for, I think it's an hour. Let me double check and make sure. Yes, for about an hour. And what we're looking for is, unlike bread loaves that need to rise until they double in size, this is not going to double in size. But what we need to see is it needs to look kind of puffy and spongy like proofed dough looks. And that can be, as far as time goes, that can be different depending on your atmosphere, your environment, your yeast, all of that. So it can be anywhere from 1 to actually 2 hours, depending on that. So we're going by appearance, and we're going to be looking not for doubled in size, but we're going to be looking for that spongy, light, airy type appearance. For me, I put when I'm proofing dough, I will often just set it in my oven with the oven light on. The oven's turned off, just have the oven light on. But of course you can proof dough in all sorts of places, and I'm sure you have your favorite place. So into the oven with just the oven light on for at least an hour. But I'll let you know when it's done. We'll talk about the consistency and how long it took for me and move on to the next step. Okay, our dough has about 10 to 15 minutes left to rise, so we're going to go ahead and get started on our filling and the streusel. So first up, we're going to do the filling, which is going to be start with 1/2 cup of sugar, or excuse me, 1/2 cup of brown sugar. 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And next we'll add 2 tablespoons of flour. 1 and 2. To that we'll add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And the recipe calls for an 1/8 teaspoon of grated nutmeg, but I like to use pumpkin pie spice. And I'm going to do a scant 1/4 teaspoon. So a scant 1/4 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. But you can use nutmeg if you like. If you do use nutmeg, maybe just do an 1/8 of a teaspoon. And that's it for the filling. We'll need to have a little bit of milk on hand and a bowl to brush on the dough, which we'll show you in just a second. And it just kind of helps keep the dough nice and moist, and it helps this filling to stick to the dough pretty well. But for now, this is all we need for our filling. I'm going to try and crush up any of those big lumps that I see in here and get a nice sandy consistency. Okay, there we go. There's our filling. We'll just set that aside for now. Now we're going to make our streusel. So we're going to start with 1 1/4 cup of flour. One and 1/4 cup of flour. Next is 1/2 cup of brown sugar again. And to that, we'll add 2 tablespoons of sugar. 1 and 2. Then a 1/4 teaspoon of some cinnamon again. And then we need 1/2 cup of butter that has been melted and cooled, which I have here, melted and cooled butter. Let me go ahead, before I pour in that butter, I'm going to go ahead and mix this around good first. Break up the sugar clumps. If you want to run your flour through a sifter, that would be good. Just get an extra fluffy pastry-like consistency. A lot of times I just don't even bother getting out a sifter, but do what you would like to do best. I'm just going to try to break up the clumps as best I can. Okay, now I'm going to pour in this butter, which is 1/2 cup, that has been melted and cooled. And this is what's going to give us our nice butter streusel topping. So good. I think this is what makes the whole coffee cake, is the topping. That butter is going to mix in and give us a nice crumbled bits, and we'll be able to crumble it even more with our fingers once we go to top our coffee cakes with it. Okay, here we go. I'm going to get my workspace cleaned up so that we can make our dough, get that all rolled out, and start actually putting the coffee cake together. Okay, we are ready to work with our dough. Here's what my dough looks like. I would prefer that it be a little more spongy than this, but it has certainly proofed some, and I really need to get going on this, so I ended up letting it proof for 1.5 hours. If I had the time, I would probably let it go a full 2 hours, but it's pretty nice and spongy. So I'm going to flour my surface here. We have our filling, our streusel, and a little bowl of milk here with a brush that we'll need to, brush the dough with in just a second. Okay, let's turn that dough onto the surface. We really don't need to knead it at this point. I'm just trying to get all the sides covered in flour so it doesn't stick to my counter too bad. Okay, we're going to get a rolling pin, and we're going to be rolling it out into a rectangle that is approximately 14 inches by 12 inches, but again, I don't measure. It's just eyeballing it the best we can. We want a general long rectangular shape. I think I'm going to need to move these because I keep bumping into them. There we go. I want it to be probably about 1/4 inch thick, not too thin, but that 12 by 14 rectangle kind of gives us a ballpark of how thin we want the pastry to be. Need to get a little bit more thicker right here. There we go. Down a little bit. Okay, not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. So here is our approximately 14 inch, whoops, let me fix that hole real quick. 14-inch by 12-inch rectangle. I'm just going to cover up this hole real quick, patch up that hole. Okay. Next, we're going to cut this rectangle into 4 equal strips, as equal as we can get them. Of course, the easiest way to do that is just to go straight down the middle and then cut each of those halves in half. There's that hole again. Patch that up real quick. Okay, at this point, we're going to brush the milk on top of each strip. This is going to keep our dough nice and moist and give our filling something to stick to so it doesn't just slide right off of the dough. My daughter absolutely loves doing this part. She says it's like painting food. She's visiting Grandma right now, so she's not here, but I'm going to make another batch of coffee cakes, probably Christmas Eve, so that she can do her fun rolling pin and painting the food that she loves to do. Okay, next is our filling. Now at this point, where this is our filling, the one that's super crumbly, doesn't have any butter in it. And we're basically going to be putting a line straight down the middle and just trying to divide what's in this bowl equally among the 4 strips. Let me recenter you there. And remember, this recipe makes 2 coffee cakes, so we only need 2 strips, 2 of these strips right here per coffee cake. I'm just going through and filling in any pieces that seem like they don't have quite as much seasoning on them or filling on them, but doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, now this next step is a little bit tricky, but it's also pretty fun too, and that is to basically roll up each strip and pinch the sides so that the filling is inside, stays inside of the roll, kind of like you would if you were making jelly rolls or cinnamon rolls. So we're just bringing it over. Whoops, trying not to spill out the filling like I just did. And pinching the ends so that the filling stays inside. It smells so good. It's not even baking yet. Just the smell of the cinnamon and the sugar. Smells so good. And this is a very messy process, but that's okay. We'll do all the cleaning at the end. Okay, at this point, we're ready to put them into our pans, so I'm going to kind of move some things around here, wash my hands, and get ready for that step. Okay, so to shape the actual coffee cakes, you're going to need 2 pie pans, but as you can see, I only have one, and I found this little squared little doodad, so we'll just have to make do with what we have and make it kind of a square coffee cake for that second one. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get some butter, and I'm just going to grease the pans really good before we load them up. Okay, now the fun part. I don't know why this is so fun, but basically we're going to like snake the rolls into a circular format. So that's what we're going to do. We'll try to do it without making a huge mess. Get it started in there. I'm just going to go on the outside corner, go around the shape of the plate, and start going inside as we go. I'm going to just kind of tap these down just a little bit. And then we're going to start the next roll where that first one stopped. Just keep going all the way around. Okay, there we go. There's our first one. Just kind of make a little spiral type shape. Now for this weird square one. I'm still going to do it somewhat. Oh, no, I'm not. I was about to say I'm still going to do it somewhat in a circle, but I don't think I am. I think I'm just going to go for it and have a square coffee cake. It's going to taste the same, right? I'm going to close the gas by pushing these in just a little bit, because when we put our butter streusel topping on, I don't want all the toppings to fall through those gaps. Okay, there's our little square one. So now it's time to put that butter streusel topping on. So let's get these here and get our streusel topping. So this streusel topping, we just need to divide it evenly in between the 2 dishes. And as we pick up with our hands, we're just going to try to kind of crumble and get a nice crumble, get that butter nice and crumbled as we sprinkle it on top. Get those big chunks, although those big chunks are really good. So I like to leave some pretty chunky. Just eyeballing it, trying to get it nice and even. Need a little more right here. Okay. The next step is it needs to do a second rise. So we're going to put both of these pans in a warm place and let them rise for a second time for 30 minutes before baking. Now, if you want to make these ahead, like I do, I stick them in the freezer and bake them on Christmas morning. So if you want to do that, you would skip the second rise for now and put these straight in the freezer like this. You would wrap some aluminum foil or saran wrap or something like that over them and put them straight in your freezer without doing the second rise. And then on Christmas morning, when you're ready to bake, you would take them out of your freezer about an hour before ready to baking. That will give you enough time to let them thaw out a bit and have about 30 minutes of rise time before going into the oven. So put them into the freezer, take them out an hour before baking on Christmas morning, or do it now. If you need to bake now, let them do a second rise for 30 minutes and into the oven they will go, and we'll be back at that point. Okay, the 30 minutes rise time is up, and here's kind of what it looks like. It doesn't look a whole lot different, but the edge of the dough does look a little bit puffier, which is what we want. I have the oven preheated to 350 degrees, and this is going to bake for 30 minutes, and we will show you the finished product in a minute. Here we are, fresh out of the oven. It's been cooling for about 10 minutes, so I'm going to cut into it and show you a slice so you can see what the inside looks like. I'm going to try not to puncture the bottom of this pan. It's an aluminum foil pan. So our square coffee cake didn't turn out too bad. Kind of fell into a circular shape. It's a nice surprise. It smells so good. It smells like Christmas morning to me. This is what I grew up with. Of course, it was Sara Lee. They went and flaked on us and stopped making it, so we had to do it ourselves. I think it turned out really good. Okay. There you go. Get you a side angle. You can see that filling that we put in there. You can see how it's like two little pockets of filling. And that butter crumb, that butter streusel topping on top is just absolutely excellent. It makes the whole coffee cake come together. If y'all try it, let me know in the comments what y'all think and if it'll become a new Christmas tradition for your family. Merry Christmas, y'all. We'll see you next time. Bye.